to be self-evident why the NBA is different than real life. But the reason that the NBA is different than real life is because the consumers of the NBA are paying to watch a competition. If the competition is not good, people will not come to the games. The reason there's a revenue-sharing league is that there is a relatively equal distribution of talent so as to ensure the quality of the games. People who are living in American society are not paying for the thrill of competition. Consumers who live in American society and power the economy are doing so for a good product. Okay, the NBA provides a good product in the way that they choose to do in their private sphere. The way that Bill Gates provides a good product is not by redistributing his income to Apple. The way that Bill Gates provides a good product is by competing in an open market with Apple and reinvesting in his own team. Okay, the idea, again, when capitalism comes and really free market economics comes down to what does the consumer want, the reason the NBA redistributes wealth is not because Donald Sterling was not a good guy. It wasn't because Donald Sterling decided, you know what would be awesome? I feel like giving away half my wealth now to other teams. Okay, the reason that Donald Sterling practiced in that way is, again, because consumers demanded that there be a competitive balance on the field. And so you have to artificially create that competitive balance in order to please consumers. So the NBA is not a good model, because the consumers of the NBA are looking for an entertaining, competitive game, and consumers in American life are looking for a better product. They're not looking for two crappy iPhones competing with each other, they're looking for the best iPhone.
So wouldn't you concede that it's possibly better to redistribute wealth then so that others are able to rise up, join the middle class, procure a better education so that they're a better workforce to complete on a global scale?
Redistribution of wealth does not achieve competition, because it turns out that what actually achieves competition is the sort of values that you impose in your work life. This is why if you have a bunch of people who win the lottery, disproportionately people who are poor and win the lottery end up poor again. The reason people are permanently poor in the United States is not because they don't have money, it's because they suck with money. The reason people are temporarily poor is because they don't have money. The reason they're permanently poor, okay, this is self-evident, folks, that's not even controversial. If you're poor in America your entire life, you are not great with money by definition. Okay, if you are, name me one person in America who's phenomenal with money, but is poor for 80 years in the United States. Anybody? Names? Anyone? Okay, military veterans. Okay, military. Okay.
Test. I'm sorry, Mr. Shapiro. I'm at a point right now, quite frankly, where I'm going to dismiss the students. I know there are other questions that would like to be asked.
Why?
With all due respect, Mr. Shapiro, Mr. Shapiro represents a narrative that he's providing to all of you guys based off of his opinions, what he believes, and what he wants to share with all of you. I know that the education was there for all of you to understand left side, right side, whatnot, but also the opportunity was allowed for him to impress upon you some of his opinions about certain things. And I think the lesson was there for me to understand and also for all of you to understand. I think what this is getting into now is it's starting to cross the line. And
what would that line be?
Why are they crossing the line? I don't see nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong.
Let me ask this question.
You're the one who's crossing the line.
Let me ask this question. If, for those students who would like to be dismissed, I'm allowing you to go ahead and do so at this time. For those of you who would like to continue to listen, you can remain and listen to Mr. Shapiro and also the information.
I know. I'm telling you, it's Mark. What's this one?
People asking questions. There's still people who want to say.
I'm gonna get the mic.
Guys in the classroom with a monologue on politics without the kids walking out. That'd be awesome. Since I'm not paid by the state of California, I can't do that.
Yes, I was wondering about your comment. Earlier you mentioned the non-aggression principle by saying that we should not initiate force onto other people. And I was wondering, what's your opinion on the U.S.'s role in world politics?
Okay, so the non-aggression principle having to do with interpersonal relations in a civilized society is not the same thing as foreign policy. The fact is that when it comes to foreign policy, you sometimes have to detect threats to yourself before those threats materialize. You don't want to always wait until Pearl Harbor or 9/11 happens. I'm not against the notion of preemptive war, depending on the evidence that can be brought to bear to show there's an actual threat to American citizens, because that is the fundamental job of the American government, is to protect your life and your liberty and your property. This is what government was instituted to do. And so the best way to do that is to sometimes go to war before you are hit. I mean, because then the question becomes, okay, so how badly do you have to be hit in order to go to war? Right? How many people have to die in order for you to go to war? Right? If there's a couple people who get shot in a random place, does that mean that you are now justified in going to war? Whereas if they hadn't died, you wouldn't have been justified in going to war. America's foreign policy is about our national interest, whereas interpersonal relations in a civilized society, we have common rules we've agreed to, and one of those rules is that if I don't take a physical action against you, you don't get to take a physical action against me. That's one of the rules in a civilized society. That is not the rule in foreign policy. If that were the rule in foreign policy, then unfortunately you'd have to wait for the world's worst people to kill a lot of people before you could do anything to stop them.
So you back the GOP, right?
Well, I mean, I'm a conservative. If the candidate, you know, is conservative and Republican, then sure. I mean, it depends on who the candidate is, but as a general matter, I vote Republican.
I just want to know, like, which candidate right now do you like support the most?
I mean, if I had to vote in a primary right now, I'd vote for Ted Cruz.
So my question is, do you think incentives offered for charity has more beneficial factors or negative factors?
So I assume this is an essay question that you're having me fill in for you. Right? All right. So this is a clever man right here. Okay, so incentives offered for charity, is this beneficial or not? I assume that the question is more to do with the government offering tax write-offs. Okay, so you know, the fact is that I think that religious people tend to give charity whether or not they get the tax write-off. As an Orthodox Jew, I give a certain percentage of my income to charity every year, regardless of whether I get the tax write-off or not. I can tell you, as somebody who's worked with 501c3 organizations, nonprofits, there's no question that people give more charity if they feel like they can get a tax write-off. Of course it means people give more charity. You know, what the boundaries should be on, you know, what is allowed as a charitable organization is a controversial topic. But, of course, like anything else in life, if you create an incentive for something, you tend to get more of it. It's true for anything. It's true from everything from sexual behavior to charity. More incentives for it means you get more of it.
Mr. Shapiro? Okay.
Stand up, yeah, thank you.
Mr. Shapiro, I just wanted to ask on your personal opinion on Donald Trump's approach on Islamophobia.
So I mean, I think that Trump's new proposal to bar all Muslim immigration is idiotic. I think it's idiotic for a variety of reasons. Now, I'm not going to pretend that the threat from radical Islam is not real, and I'm not going to pretend that there shouldn't be monitoring of possible radical Islamic threats coming into the United States, as well as radical Islamic threats currently in the United States. There obviously, when it comes to immigration, I'm of the opinion that we should do significant ideological background checks on people before they enter, regardless of what their religion is. There are really a couple of reasons why Trump's proposal on Muslim immigration is foolish. First of all, yesterday, Trump had said something about how American citizens who are abroad shouldn't even be allowed to come back, which is just asinine and unconstitutional and immoral. I mean, you don't get to have your rights taken. I've said, you have individual rights. They're not taken away from you without due process of law under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution. So that is stupid. He backed off of that today, and he said that he's just talking about foreign Muslims entering the United States. And the reason I think that's stupid is because I don't really care what you tend to believe religiously. I tend to care about what your political ideology is, what do you think government ought to be used for, and also, more importantly, how do you behave? How do you behave is a much more important question to me than whether you think that Jesus was born of a virgin birth or whether Muhammad ascended from the stone in Jerusalem. Like that makes no difference to me whatsoever. The only thing that makes a difference to me is how that impacts your view of what government ought to do. So, for example, I ban everybody from coming in the country if you believe that the government ought to prosecute you for drawing Muhammad. Right? I think that's a pretty good reason you shouldn't be able to come in the country, because that's a basically un-American idea. Right? You should be able to say what you want without the government cracking down on you. But again, that's not a religious thing as much as it is an ideological thing. Also, by the way, his Muslim immigration proposal is highly damaging to U.S. intelligence efforts at home and abroad. You're not going to get a lot of Muslims to work with you if they think that you're going to throw them out at the first available opportunity, or that you're never going to let a Muslim into the country again, no matter how moderate that person happens to be.
Shapiro, do you agree with the notion that ISIS and Islam are synonymous?
No. ISIS and Islam are not synonymous, obviously, but is ISIS Islamic? Sure. Okay, it's asinine to contend that ISIS is not Islamic. Of course it's Islamic, it's just a branch of Islam that is quite radical in scope. Now, I'm also going to mention here that the notion that there is a only tiny minority of Muslims who are in fact radicalized is not true. I mean, if you look at polls around the world, I've done a video on this, you can see on YouTube. I go through the Pew Research polls and evaluate standards based on what percentage of populations in various countries backs terrorism or honor killing of women, what percentage backs prosecution based on Sharia law by the government, right? And it turns out that actually hundreds of millions of people believe in these things. That's not the same thing as being a terrorist, but it does mean that you believe in things that are fundamentally anti-Western. So that's problematic. So is ISIS the sole representative? No, there's no sole representative of any religion. And I'm not really concerned about the idea of, there's some people you'll hear who will get into, the violent passages of the Quran, and that's not something that interests me. You can find violent passages of the Bible also, and I'm a Bible-believing Jew. But what matters to me is behavior. What matters to me is how that behavior manifests, particularly in terms of the ideology that you believe. So, is ISIS Islamic? Yes. Is it the only form of Islam? No. Or should we be concerned about radical Islam across the globe? Absolutely.
This is going to be the last question.
Dr. Shapiro, on August 28, 2003, in an article on townhall.com, in which you analyzed the rise of gay and lesbian studies in college, you said, if you pay tuition, you're sponsoring the militant homosexual agenda. If you pay taxes, you're sponsoring the militant homosexual agenda. If your child majors in English, you're sponsoring the militant homosexual agenda. Tell Bailey to major in math. So I guess my question is, earlier you were talking about grouping and how liberals do grouping.
Yes.
Would you say that this is an example of grouping and therefore you're kind of crossing the boundary into a liberal?
No, and I will explain why. When you use my taxpayer dollars for stuff I don't approve, then it's sponsoring a particular agenda. And it turns out that in the state of California, which now has a law on its books, for example, that suggests that we have to teach gay and lesbian history in schools, that is in fact an agenda. It turns out, here's the thing, that one of the things that annoys me, is the idea that people are unbiased. Everybody's biased. Okay, I'm honest enough to recognize that I'm a conservative. Well, you'll hear from a lot of teachers, in this school and others, you'll hear that they're objective representatives of the truth. That isn't true. Everybody has their bias, everybody has their politics. I'm just honest enough to admit my bias in politics. When it comes to the number of the idea that the state is sponsoring particular viewpoints, failing to recognize that the state sponsors a variety of viewpoints, including what I think is certainly accurately termed a militant homosexual agenda when it comes to the idea that you are going to teach in schools, specifically gay and lesbian history, which is now mandated by state law. Yeah, that's sponsoring an agenda. And again, the state sponsors lots of agendas. So, yeah, I'm not going to run away from something that I wrote and agree with.
What's inappropriate about saying that there are been homosexuals that have been persecuted, or that homosexual men and women have contributed positively to...
There's nothing negative in saying that homosexuals have been persecuted or that homosexuals have contributed positively, but I don't think the important thing about Leonardo da Vinci is that he liked dudes. I think the important thing about Leonardo da Vinci is his contribution to Western civilization. And I think that has very little to do with where he wanted to put his genitals.
So where does it rise to militancy then?
Where does it rise to militancy? It rises to militancy when you start grouping people based on their sexual orientation without any reference to their actual contribution to the culture. Okay, the fact is that the contributions of Leonardo da Vinci had nothing to do with his proclivity for people of the same sex. Just as, Abraham Lincoln's sexual proclivities had nothing to do with his contributions.
But we're not talking about, in California, we make mention of a Stonewall, we make mention of Harvey Milk, we make mention of positive people pursuing civil rights. Okay,
first of all, again, your definition of civil rights includes, for example, same-sex marriage, which is a very hot-button political topic, still in California. Okay, the idea that that's not an agenda is, of course it's an agenda. It means you acknowledge it's an agenda.
Absolutely.
So it's certainly an agenda. Right? You don't think it's militant, and I do. That's all.
By the way, the notion that our educators do not have objectivity, I'll be the first one. And my students know that I have a particular agenda.
Well, I appreciate your
however, I also appreciate everyone here that's willing to listen to multiple ideas.
Yeah.
Okay, and objective.
Well, I appreciate you.
Okay. highly important to listen to different ideas, even when you disagree. Mr. Shapiro and I would never agree on most anything.
I appreciate you coming anyway.
But I think that everyone should form their own opinions after having listened to multiple points of view, and that we should be allowed to express those, even when we disagree, and that two people can disagree in a polite, respectful manner, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
So,